Thank you, Jodie. Thank you for your presentation, Rob. And I don't know how I'm going to follow, so bear with me, please, everyone. But I guess a great segue too, because you've mentioned you've been talking about the Asparagopsis, but you also mentioned Desmanthus and Legume. And today I'd like to, or for this next 20 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about pasture legumes, of which they are. So getting on with it, including an adequate population, let me go to the next slide. Including an adequate population of legumes in a pasture can improve animal productivity and perhaps even methane emission. It can do this by increasing the quality of feed as well as quantity. I'm going to grab this thing. I should have done a test before I... There we go, look at that, wonders of modern technology. Righto, so just taking a look at one of the significant beef producing regions of Northern Australia. This is the Brigalow Belt in the blue, and it's the Queensland part of the Brigalow Belt. It covers a high percentage of Australia's beef herd, 30%. It's round figures. Numbers have adjusted over the last few years. On a small percentage of land. And it's considered to be productive agricultural land, both in improved and native pastures, but there are stuff-all, there's bugger-all legumes that are growing and contributing to the feed quality. There have been decades of research into legume suitability for graziers in this region, and we've been speaking about science and the importance of it. And what's recommended to graziers needs to be based on that research. So I've titled my presentation about the do's and don'ts of legumes. So let's take a look at some of the legume decisions that need to be made. Selecting the wrong legume will result in spending money and seed germinating, but not surviving, or not surviving for very long. Selecting the right legume for the job will ensure that you or your clients have a better chance of growing a healthy, persistent and productive pasture, providing some of those benefits that were sold along with the seed at the local ag store. Getting pastures established well is equally as important, and I'm going to cover some of that later on. These are just a couple of nice looking pastures. There's grass and legume, and medic over in the very green bit over there. So I thought I'd get some interaction, if that's okay with you guys. It's just nearly coffee o'clock. So if you would like to show your hand, if you've come across any of these legumes, I'm going to go through a bunch of them. If you've come across any of these legumes in your adventures through the paddocks, either your own or clients. So first off the mark, we've got spineless burr medic. Specifically, this one's scimitar, and yeah, it's one of the medics. Anyone come across? Actually, I'll bring up the next one too to avoid, to bunch them together. Two medics. Anyone's come across medics? Yep, there's a couple. Jumping straight into tropical legumes, burgundy bean, yep, and very similar. Syratro, yep, very similar flowers. And another viney one, butterfly pea. Yeah, looking at all you Central Queenslanders. If you haven't come across lucerne before, then I'd be very happy to talk to you. But there's lucerne. Same story with legume as well. Very visible, of course, in rows. You may or may not have come across Katinga stylo, fantastic, if you're familiar with that. And Desmanthus, and Rob's mentioned that one as well. So we'll continue. I've got a couple for, I don't know what I was going to say. I was going to jump to my next little section. So I shan't. Shrubby stylo, who's seen shrubby stylo? Yeah, and Caribbean stylo, yeah. You guys have been out and about a fair bit. Common stylo. Hey, there we go. Dennis might need to just keep his hand up, I think. Fine stem stylo, and roundleaf cassia, or wind cassia. Yeah, most people come across it too. So yeah, heaps of different legumes. They look different. Tried to find some that were green at least. That was a pretty good idea. Alrighty-o. So naturally, these legumes are all plants, and they all have different soil requirements. Some are suited to a range of soil types, from the clays to the sand. Katinga sort of fits in that band, but others seem to like one or the other. So going forward, I've grouped. I'm going to go through a few of the legumes, and I've grouped them into two groups: the clay and loam, and the sand. So, a couple of pros and cons about some of these legumes for clay soils. Starting with medics. So, medics are an annual plant which grow through a wet winter. And we're here in Brisbane, it's southern Queensland. Winter growing medics, more common, so that's one of their best features, is that they're an excellent winter feed, which good supplements for dry grass during winter. There's a range of species available which suit focus. It's an afternoon. There are a range of species that have early or late seeding to fit a range of different climates. In Northern Australia, unfortunately though, they only suit southern Queensland where it's wet in wintertime. So we move on again to the tropical varieties, species. Burgundy bean, suited to a higher rainfall climate area. Fantastic palatability, grows quickly. But unfortunately it is better as a short-term forage. Sriracha is very similar, growing in a higher rainfall area. High palatability, grows quickly, but unfortunately can be grazed out quickly as well. Butterfly pea, it's a great quality plant for central Queensland. That's where it grows really well. One of its cons, though, is that it's not as productive in southern Queensland. So you're starting to see the trend that I'm bringing about. Lucerne is a fantastic year-round feed option, and it's suited to the higher rainfall areas. Unfortunately, it's better as a short-term forage option as well. And yeah, sometimes people like to resow it every 5 to 10 years. Legume, yeah, another fantastic plant, quality feed. One of its best features, of course, is that there's a culture around legume about using good agronomy to establish it. So you have mostly successful paddocks of legume. Unfortunately, it does need additional management if you're picking legumes. The rumen bug, of course, or weed control if you don't want it getting in creeks and in the wrong paddocks. Desmanthus, drought hardy, productive plant, maybe reducing some methane emissions down the track, and now of course. But unfortunately, the small seeds mean that it has lower seedling vigour, and it's also more difficult to establish. The same story applies for Katinga stylo, which is the only stylo that we have in Australia that grows on clay soils. So yeah, same story with it. It's unfortunately got the small seed going on, so yeah, it has low seedling vigour. They were probably the only negatives I could come up with for a couple of those. But we jump now to the sandy soils, and I'm going to start off with what I think is probably an all-time favourite for Northern Australia, shrubby stylo, Seca or Saran, you might know them as. So shrubby likes frost-free areas, and yeah, it's drought hardy and it loves poor soils. Can become dominant if the grass is grazed out and it doesn't like frost because it likes warmer areas. Next is Caribbean stylo. Trade names, variety names, Amiga and Verano. It's tolerant of acidity and also poor soils, so there's lots of options available for Northern Australia for poor soils. Unfortunately, Caribbean doesn't like wood logging or shade, and I think it's a similar story for common stylo. Some of the common names you can buy it under include V8, Beef Builder, a few of those sort of names. A bit more exciting than the name common stylo. Yeah, also tolerant of acidity and poor soils. Unfortunately, it has a limited area of adoption as well. So it's adapted to the tropics, and so that's positive for the tropical areas, but if you're further south down these sort of areas, it's yeah, not the best option. And a similar story for fine stem stylo. I've added the variety name in here too, Oxley. So it's yeah, it's got a limited area of adaptation as well, and in this case, it's to the southeast Queensland sandy soils. But it's great because it's a cool climate option for this area. So another good option for sandy soils. And finally, roundleaf cassia or wind cassia. It's a drought hardy, self-regenerating legume. It's productive. Yeah, you can't really go wrong with roundleaf cassia, except that it acts as an annual sometimes, and sometimes being any time you don't have year-round rain and no frost, I suppose. But it also, of course, as you may already know, it has reported low palatability, and so often it can overcome pastures. I'm getting some nods. So, and yeah, it can become a bit of a problem. So we've taken a look now at a range of different species. I want to get to talking now about getting the preparation of legumes right. And this might be for you, it might be for your clients as you're talking. So we want to begin with the end in mind. We want to begin with pasture establishment with the end in mind. So that's to say, don't just do what the smiley salesman tells you to do. Instead, focus on the green bit, on the stuff that you want. We want you to focus on what you want to grow, how you want to grow it, and for how long, which is also an important consideration. Over the last few years, we've been running a bunch of day-long workshops with graziers in the Brigalow Belt area, and we've been trying to help producers to establish legumes successfully in their paddock. Successful legume establishment can lead to maximum production. So grasses and legumes in a paddock and cows eating and, you know, lots of good stuff. But there are multiple steps. So right at the top is our target, maximum production. But to get there, we need to start down the bottom. Start with the foundations, start with the basics. And firstly, we encourage people to look at picking the right paddock. We want people to think about best bang for buck mostly, so accessible but mostly the best bang for buck. Next consideration is getting the right legume. So we've just gone through a stack of legume options for people to choose. We want it to be a good performer, we want it to be a good grower, and of course suitable to the soil and climate. We want a good establishment method. So are we going to do a whole paddock? Or are we just going to do a little bit? Moving on, we want to think about getting the job done. We want to prepare a good seed bed. We want to consider soil moisture, weed and grass control in that area, and seed and weed seed banks, in the soil. Once we've got everything right for the soil, we've got to think about how we're going to sow the seed into the into the paddock, and for that you're thinking about seed contact with the soil and placement, how deep, how not deep. And I say not deep because sometimes you don't want it to go too deep, you want really shallow placement. Inoculation, legumes require rhizobia. There is some discussion around whether the rhizobia in coating is effective at time of planting. So rhizobia during planting is our recommendation. Next, of course, is good early growth. So you're going to get these things up and growing. You want your little plants to grow up nice and strong. You really want them to go to seed so that they're dumping them down for the next generation to start, and you want them to be big enough to survive the next dry or the next cold season. And then as years go by, you need to look at, we encourage these producers to look at how they can get their legumes to thicken up, and that's the same principles. So maximising the seed set as well. We go through step by step with these guys at the workshops. We look at each one of these little coloured columns things here, step by step. What are you going to do? Which paddock? We have action plan. What are you going to do? You know, kill the grass. We think it's quite effective. It shows people, or gets people thinking about when are they going to start killing grass? When do they sow? When's the most optimal time? So good establishment practices can involve, as I've mentioned, can involve soil disturbance, fertiliser application, planting at a time to make the most of the rainfall, etc., etc. And as the saying goes, prior preparation prevents poor performance. So I've been doing a fair bit of painting lately, and so yep, my paint. And of course, it's the same story with painting, isn't it? You can't just whack the paint on, because if you do and the walls are dirty, paint doesn't stick. So by planning a legume establishment, a bit of a plan, and getting all the gear you need before it comes time to plant, you can be more confident that the seed that you plant is going to grow and do what you want it to do. Oh, so I had a couple of pointers, top pointers, and they're in my notes, so you all get to listen to my lovely voice. Top 3 pointers. So whether it's for yourself or for your clients, prepare and plan your paddock as best as practicable to maximise your chance of success. So that's this sort of preparation stuff. And at the very least, if you don't do anything else, do some soil tests to work out whether your soil is deficient in something, just to work out what's going on beneath the surface. And then, yeah, select a species that's going to do the job when you want it, for how long as you want it. I did have a plug for Future Beef on there. If, as a bonus pointer, it was going to be to call the department if needed, the Queensland Department of Ag, call Jodie, she's a good woman to know. And there's a bunch of resources, well actually there's a bunch of resources as well on Future Beef. So yeah, we'll keep that updated, adding more things. But for the time being, that's me. Thank you very much, everyone.